It has not been a priority in the investor community. And, most investors would tell you that they don't invest in things that they don't understand. But I would argue that if you extend that sentence, it'd be things they don't understand and people they don't understand.
I've heard you say that your latest role is the one that you have found to be the most rewarding. Can you just talk a little bit about what you're doing?
Absolutely. And I say rewarding and exciting because now I have an opportunity to work with early stage companies that were founded by women and multicultural entrepreneurs. And I can't think of a better way to apply 31 years of investment banking experience than with these companies who have great ideas, great leaders, but really don't have a real idea about what it takes to evolve and scale into a company that could go public in today's market or tomorrow's market environment.
Explain the Multicultural Innovation Lab.
The Multicultural Innovation Lab is a regular way accelerator where we bring in companies and we give them three things. We give them cash, like all accelerators do, in exchange for a single-digit percentage of the company. We also give them content, 6 months of learning around how to negotiate your term sheet, how to manage your shareholder list, how to think about your KPIs, how to pivot from a B2C to a B2B, all of those things that you need to know as a leader and a founder. And we also have content around how to evolve as a leader, if you will. And then we also give them connections because as the leading global investment bank, there's really not a relationship that we can't access that could be useful to these companies. So we do make introductions to our clients or to people who we have relationships with that could help them scale their business or could be a supplier or could be a major customer or an acquirer of these companies.
Why is this particular focus important to Morgan Stanley? If you're looking for just returns, you might say, let's just start an innovation lab. Why focus on multicultural?
There is a clear opportunity here, Dan, because as you know, only 4% of VC dollars, depending on your source, go to women founders, and less than 2% go to multicultural founders. And as an econ concentrator, I know very well that where there is a market inefficiency, there is a commercial opportunity. You probably know that we've started a multicultural client strategy, which I was asked to lead in the summer of 14. And frankly, my chairman said, no bank has ever led in this space. And this is not about diversity and inclusion. That's really an HR pursuit. This is not about philanthropy. That's what we do at the foundation. This is around commercial opportunities. Nobody has led, we can lead. And I'd like you to figure out how to do that.
What have you learned in the first two sessions?
Yes, the most important thing that I've learned is if you listen to popular business press, everyone says, well, we can't find multicultural entrepreneurs or we can't find enough women entrepreneurs. Well, I think that we have forever dispelled that myth. When we started our first class, we did not advertise anywhere. We went out on the Whisper Network and we got 100 submissions for 5 spots. Last year, for the class 2, we put it out publicly during the Christmas holidays. So in about 3 weeks, we got 300 submissions for 9 spots. This year, we launched our invitation to apply on our demo day, November 20th. And I will tell you that within 5 days, we had 50 submissions. That's the first big learning. There is not a supply problem with respect to finding entrepreneurs of color and entrepreneurs that are women.
So what's the problem? People just haven't been looking?
I do believe that's really the issue. It has not been a priority in the investor community. And, most investors would tell you that they don't invest in things that they don't understand. But I would argue that if you extend that sentence, it'd be things they don't understand and people they don't understand. And if you haven't been trafficking in that space, you do have some trepidation and you do see an inordinate risk when there's not one there.
A lot of people are looking at 2019 and saying economy might be challenged, especially in the second half of the year. So do you think about working with founders differently when the economy turns sour, or is it the same curriculum no matter what's going on around you?
It'll pretty much be the same curriculum, but I think what we probably will do is to, sort of turn up the fire, if you will, around how do you create the illusion of scarcity? How do you create momentum when in fact people are sort of stepping away from risk? How do you make people feel like they must own this and they must do it now? So despite the fact that they pulled back on risk, this is a bet worth taking. So we'll probably spend more time on those kinds of arguments and those kinds of pitches, if you will.
I heard a great interview with you with Poppy Harlow,
Yes.
where it was a terrific interview, and you talked about finishing Harvard, finishing HBS, going to Morgan Stanley. You had all the learning, you had all the knowledge, you had all the drive, But what you didn't realize was the importance of networks or of how to connect with people or how to build these relationships. Can you just talk a little bit about the impact that had on you or how you came to realize that?
I realized that being smart and working hard wasn't enough. It still wasn't getting me at the top of the class, despite how smart I thought I was and despite how hard I was working, because you cannot outwork me, Dan. But I realized that, there was somebody who had to be behind closed doors arguing passionately on my behalf. But at the end of the day, while performance currency gets your name on the list that's being discussed behind closed doors, when your name is called, if no one else in that room can speak on your behalf, they just go to the next name. And it has nothing to do with your ability to do the job or nothing to do with whether or not you deserve top bucket or middle bucket. But because no one in that room speaks on your behalf, by default, either you don't get chosen for that specific opportunity or you end up in the middle bucket. And that was the aha for me. And that's when I realized that there was a missing component in my success equation, and it was a relationship of a sponsor, as I started calling it way back in 1990.
And how did you find a sponsor?
I started realizing that the sponsor, number one, had to be within your organization, unlike a mentor. Your mentor can be outside of your organization, but they just need to understand your context. But that person needed to be in the organization, and they needed to have a seat at the decision-making table, and they needed to have some juice. So once I figured that out, then it was, okay, who can I identify? And I started thinking about who has access to my work. It doesn't necessarily have to be your boss. It's great if it is, but it just needs to be somebody that will have credibility behind closed doors when they're talking about you. So any exposure to your work gives them that credibility.
Sometimes you run into people who feel that once they discover this path, they'll be accused of being nakedly ambitious, of being, overly career focused. Did that ever slow you down?
That's right. And let me tell you what I tell people who worry about that, because when I say that, people say, oh, but what about if people think I'm brown-nosing? And you must realize that there's not one role in any industry where you can succeed without a relationship. So that is just table stakes, part of anybody's success equation. So don't think about it with respect to brown nosing, because remember, a relationship goes two ways. So while that person may be spending their currency on you at that moment, it is your job to also spend your currency either with that person or on somebody else. Because remember, the people who are in power today won't always be the people who are in power. And you might rise to a position of power, and that person may choose to still be on the playing field. And now you have currency to help them.
Well, so talk about that. At some point, you went from being the person wondering what was going on in the closed door room to being in that room, having that seat at the table, making those decisions. Were there things that you explicitly did to be able to lend help to people who didn't know this was the path, or to get people's voices in the room who wouldn't have necessarily been in the room?
So when there's a gross generalization that's been thrown out in the room, for example, oh, Dan's a good guy, but I'm not sure that he has the quantitative muscle. I'm not sure he has the skills. Here's where I enter. So what have we done to test them? And if there's silence in the room, that there's no credible backup to that, that's somebody's impression, well, that's not really fair. That impression prevails. We need facts, especially when you're talking about somebody's bonus, somebody's promotion, or somebody's ascension to the next opportunity. So some of the most important things I've done is ask the question in the room. And if there's no answer, now that's exposed. And then I can say, well, if we failed to test Dan's quantitative skills, we can't tag Dan for that. So we got to give him a pass on this one, right, guys? Right? That's one of the most important things that you can do. Your voice is power. If you have been invited into that room, you cannot afford to leave your voice dormant when you have an opportunity to spend that voice and that currency on somebody's behalf.
Well, I always love to ask questions about career advice. There must be people all the time that come to you and say, you have this phenomenal career. What can I do to get on the same path that you've been on? Is there any particular piece of advice you give them?
Now, the first thing I say is, what do you want to do? So you don't want to necessarily walk my path. The most important thing that you can do is authentically figure out what you want to do. Then I tell them to, figure out what relationships that you'd like to build, and think about that now. And lastly, I tell them, have flexible knees. Because if you had told me that my life would look the way it looks now, 31 years into it, I would not have bought that. Because that was so far away from the vision that I could see as a 24-year-old. But now I see how every experience builds and actually opens up other opportunities for you. And you need to stay flexible, because sometimes those other paths are far bigger than you could have imagined.